Good morning and welcome to all of our participants and panelists joining us on this Mandela Day. My name is Adam, the Managing Director for Mindful Skills, bringing together our guests to discuss how do we alleviate youth unemployment through skills development initiatives. Starting from my extreme right, we've joined by Khalil Patel, who is the Program Director of the Skills for Life initiative at the IYF, which is an international NGO. We'll introduce everyone and then give you an opportunity to share a bit more about the work you do. We then joined to his left by Busisiwe Sitoli, representing Business Unity South Africa. She's also the group head for transformation at EPSA. And then next to me, we are joined by Irfan Mangera, who's the youth program manager at the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. So Mindful Skills is a skills development company working in skills development, and we of course have recognized that there is indeed a gap and there's a crisis on our hands with the high youth unemployment, and that's why I found it critical to have this engagement today. We're going to now go on. We also joined live by Crystal online, who is the project lead at Youth Capital. Thank you, Crystal, for joining us.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you, Crystal. While we've got you online, can I ask you to introduce yourself and Youth Capital and the sort of work that you do?
Sure, thanks so much, and I'm excited to be here, and thanks for making the provision for me to join virtually. I'm sorry I couldn't be in the room with all of these great panelists. So we at Youth Capital are a youth-centered advocacy campaign looking at the long-term systemic changes that are needed to tackle the growing crisis of youth unemployment. And we are doing this through making sure that young people's voices and their lived experiences are at the center of policy and implementation, and the solutions put forward are really driven by young people themselves. And we bring together all of the stakeholders involved, from businesses to government to civil society, and most importantly, young people themselves, around the action plan, which highlights the 10 key levers that we think we need to shift if we're going to tackle the crisis of youth unemployment. And of course, skills development is critical throughout that. And at Youth Capital, we really believe that we need to understand the journey of young people from places of learning to places of earning, and figuring out ways for supporting them throughout that journey if we want to start finding ways to create an adult population that is thriving and can create a sustainable livelihood for themselves. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Crystal. I'm going to move on to Khalil to give us a bit about IYF and his work he does.
Thank you so much, Altaf. Khalil Patel, I am the program manager for IYF. I lead a program called Skills for Life, and our program is focused on supporting TVET colleges within South Africa in partnership with the Department of Higher Education and Training. And the work that we carry out is targeted at capacity strengthening of the TVET colleges. And the reason we do this, of course, is to improve learning outcomes for TVET college students. So that's improving their ability to find work, to graduate. So it's improving their academic success, their workforce success, and ultimately their employability success. A key component, of course, of our work is not just supporting systems change within the TVET colleges themselves, but additionally creating a pipeline to more effectively transition students from the TVET colleges into the workforce.
Thank you. Busisiwe.
Thank you so much. Good morning to the people on the line. We're hoping this is going to be an exciting session for you as well, as much as it is for us. So I am Group Head of Transformation, Diversity and Inclusion for the APSA Group. However, I am also here in my capacity as a representative of the Business Unity South Africa, as well as BASA, which is the Banking Association for the banks. So I'm going to really speak about the business of business, and in terms of the role that I play really in the space that I'm in is that I focus on transformation, diversity and inclusion with the key objective of ensuring that we are inclusive as an organization, but also as an industry as well as businesses in terms of economic activity to ensure that we are actually including, everybody who's able to work in the economy. And a big part of that is the youth, because if you look at the statistics, the Africa report actually mentioned the fact that 60% of Africa is composed of youth, which means that, the people that are supposed to be helping businesses to thrive is actually the youth, and that is one big piece, big part of our strategy as ABSA as well, to say, how do we ensure that we are including the youth in the economy, but most importantly, how do we ensure that we are actually empowering them to be able to add value when they are involved in business activities.
Thank you so much for that, Busisiwe. Irfan?
Thanks so much, Altaf, and a blessed and reflective Mandela Day to everyone who's listening and for my fellow panelists. I'm here representing the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. Foundation was founded by Uncle Kathy with a purpose at that point to deepen non-racialism in South Africa. The foundation has grown tremendously, and we've now moved towards different facets of work. One of those is the youth program, which I lead, the youth activism program, which really focuses on how do we mobilize youth, organize young people, and build a consciousness amongst young people so that they empowered enough to tackle issues that they face within their own communities. But not from a savior perspective, but from a position where ours is to upskill, train, empower, and help them achieve their goals that they set out for themselves.
Fantastic. I love that we such a diverse panel and representing sort of every sector that's involved in skills development that we required, that is required amongst youth in South Africa, and making that change and shift. And like Busisiwe shared, 60% of Africa is youth, and that should be what we're driven towards, is including youth in our spaces. With that, I'm going to ask Crystal to share a bit more and give us some insight on the youth unemployment in South Africa and the challenges faced by young people in seeking employment.
Thanks so much, Altaf. And I think, there's a lot we can say here, and the numbers, I think, speak for themselves. If we filled the F&B stadium almost 90 times now, we still wouldn't hold all of the young people who are not in employment, education, or training. And I think often when we have these conversations, for those of us who aren't living it, who aren't in it, these numbers can wash over us, and we forget that there are human beings behind that story. And I encourage people to go and check out the documentary we just released on Youth Day. It's only 15 minutes, but it looks at 9 young people from Khayelitsha. And what really, resounded for me from that is that young people are not going to be young for forever. Right? We need to act now, and we need to act with a sense of urgency. We often focus on one aspect of youth unemployment because it's easier to focus on one piece of this very complex puzzle. But I think it's important to understand that young people are a heterogeneous group. There isn't one silver bullet for everyone, but we need to look at the different solutions and a package of solutions that will address different groups of youth. The overarching themes that I think have been coming through for us recently around youth unemployment are just the cost of job seeking. Just last week, there was quite a lot of conversation on Twitter about people quitting their jobs because the cost of petrol prices has driven up taxi fare horrendously over the past couple of months, as we all know. And what does that mean for young people, even young people who have managed to get an opportunity in an entry-level job? Because of the distance, they have to travel from their home to their place of employment, are actually quitting their job because 2/3 of their salary is going towards taxi fare, if not more. And that's for those that have jobs. Now you take a step back to young people who are looking for work, and the cost of traveling to an interview is sometimes more than the young person can afford. How do we look at opening up the pathways to these earning opportunities for young people in a way that works for young people? So, we can say, oh, we should do things online, but we all know with load shedding, the cost of data, not even that is always, a viable solution for all young people. And so, if we're looking at the business sector, how can we employ young people differently? And then when young people are in places of work, I think businesses can often underestimate the struggles that young people are going through. They're showing up with legacies of mental health issues and trauma that they've been through, and from households where no adult is employed, and now they're expected to show up in a place of work and know how to, communicate with their boss, knowing how to communicate that they're going to be late for work because, the taxis are on strike or whatever it may be on that day. And young people often don't know how to communicate, and what it comes across as, there's this perception that young people, are lazy, or they are entitled, or they don't want entry-level work, and that young people just want to do nothing. And none of that is true. When you speak to young people, they are doing, I just listened to a podcast from Children's Radio Foundation this morning, a young girl in Alex who is doing 5 jobs at the same time, just to try to create a better career path for herself. So these are not, stories of exceptional young people. These are, the realities of many young people across South Africa. And I think these conversations are important, but where they need to land is in, solutions that speak to the context of South Africa and speaks to the realities that young people are facing.
So if I may add to that point, I mean, interestingly, our wife, when we inherit in our programming is always a component of monitoring, evaluation, research and learning to make sure that we are responding to current needs of young people. And interestingly, from a study that came out just recently in May from our work in the Limpopo province, one of the topics or areas or concerns rather that came out from students interviewed during that particular MIL study revealed that one of the challenges young people are facing at present is hunger, and this is in the Tibet college system. So we're working with young adults, but they're struggling academically. And again, looking back from that point, we see that hunger being an identified trigger rather in that regard, which speaks very closely to what you're saying, Crystal, about young people just not being able to afford, going to work, let alone finding work, but just being able to afford taxi fare from transporting themselves from their home to their place of work to be able to earn a salary, and it's just not feasible at this point in time for many young people.
No, it is.
Yeah, sorry if I can just to add, we did a report that's just come out beyond the cost, also around May, so similar time to your study, and 8 in 10 young people that, did our survey said they had to choose between putting food on the table or going to an interview and looking for work. 8 out of 10 young people. That is a staggering figure, and we should all be horrified that that's the reality that young people are facing.
No, I think it is scary indeed, and us being a small business and still having the opportunity to employ young people and bring young people into our space, we so often see it that young people just cannot afford to even seek employment. It's critical and such a vital choice between going for a job interview or making sure there's food on the table, and often it's young people that have families to see to as well. It's not just themselves. It's not only about them. And I think Busisiwe, you perhaps maybe you will know and understand a bit more when you get to that stage. And I think maybe in corporate it's a bit different. When I engage with corporates and they're so frustrated that young people don't pitch up for interviews, they agree but they don't pitch up. And why is that the case? But I think we're now beginning to understand, and I think that's why today's conversation is so critical, is now we know what are some of the issues and how do we quickly enough change the way we approach employment, recruitment, and that sort of thing, to enable young people and not disable them. With that, I want to ask Irfan, who works closely on the ground with young people, what's the situation? We always just say that young people are not interested, or they want everything easy. But what is the situation that faces young people on the ground?
Thanks so much. Both speakers already covered some of what the experience is, and I think Crystal, we have similar. Well, the work isn't the same, but there's similar intersections, and part of the research that they do and the reports they do are reflective of that, or what's our experience on the ground. We have just about 30 community-based youth clubs now under the youth activism program, all across Houghton, with a membership of active members close to 400. And we see young people willingly want to contribute to tackling these issues. And fundamentally, for all young people, unemployment is the biggest challenge currently. But in South Africa's mix, you have poverty, inequality, you have all these other issues, gender-based violence, you have the climate crisis affecting us. And all of these things have a huge role in discussing unemployment. So how does it affect young people? For example, you look at the Lehigh community, right? Lehigh is a township close to Lenasia. It's a lower income, working class community, very little infrastructure. So you have a municipality that agrees that they need to develop, so they put up, they do the IDP process, agree on putting up a library. The library is built since 2018. Today it's standing as a monument, not accessible to the community. Now what this means for young people who want employment, who want to upskill themselves, who want to develop their CVs, who want to access jobs on internet, that means that they won't have access. They have to travel, again, the issue of taxis and transport to neighboring Lenasia to get to a library there. There's no high schools in that community. So what does that mean for young people there? Is that they don't have teacher support to guide them. They don't have the kind of resources that's available at a school to support them. These are just some examples. If you go to, I do a lot of when we go to visit the communities and the organizers, we see the state of youth. We have young people sitting hopeless in their communities because they feel that the system is really not working for them. And I can tie this into how young people are not voting as much because they don't want to. The system is not, giving us opportunities for learning and earning, as Crystal mentioned. So it's coupled in a huge ecosystem of failures of the system, whether you look at the interconnection of transport, taxis themselves are, in the same community, Lehigh, 2 days ago, there's a huge shootout between taxis, so there's violence. What does that mean for young people? It affects the mental health, puts us in this depression, puts us in this state where you don't feel like you can make a difference. You don't feel like you can take that step and go and have the confidence enough to go and meet anyone, to go around and ask for a job, to go and seek something. So Crystal mentioned this in the job-seeking journey that's so tough. You rather choose using the little that you have to feed you and your family over trying to find a job because it's just so expensive to do so. And while interventions like the NYDA, they have that SA Youth platform where jobs are, the young people can go on. The same young people that I work with don't have the kind of skills. We assume that they have the basic skills for using a laptop, but they don't. Schools, in many instances, don't teach them those things. Mm-hmm. So the program we're running is trying to say, okay, as organizers, we're going to train you, we're going to build your confidence, your ability to work as a community. Because our theory and our philosophy is that if communities are sustainable, you create that natural ecosystem where there's jobs available, where the businesses there can, you encourage entrepreneurship, but through that also employment for young people. And I think just to end is or rather the program, while focuses on activism and breeding a new generation of young activists, fundamentally these activists are dealing with these issues. And unemployment is our number one, obviously, on that radar, but it's an intersecting issue which touches base on every other connected problem that South Africa is facing. Because the failures of Eskom, we have to ask ourselves who benefits from these things, and why do we not put in place systems that allow for the same example, energy, which then means that young people can be part of the just transition network, where there's jobs available for them there. But okay, I think I'm going a bit wild, but I'm going to leave that there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Irfan, and I totally understand, working on the ground and with young people so intimately, that there's so much to share. There's so many issues faced by young people. There's so many issues faced by South Africans in general, and just this morning on my call with Crystal to check in, everything's in order. She's like, "Oh, you're lucky you don't have load shedding. It's just suspended now." So, I mean, these are some of the bigger issues that we're all faced with, but it's also young people that are faced with that, because I'm sure not having electricity means now spending on some sort of fuel for cooking, for warmth. I mean, these are often challenges faced in our colder months. And now it's taking that little resources and putting it all over, trying to cover everything necessary to survive, So I think it's so critical when you look at on the ground sort of thing. Busisiwe, do you want to share maybe some of the young people that you work with that are now employed, just sharing some hope with our viewers, that there is hope, but of course the system needs to be changed.
Altav, you mentioned earlier on that business sometimes doesn't understand in terms of where the young people come from. You actually speaking to the converted, because I'm a social worker by profession. I have worked as a social worker, a couple of years before I got into the corporate world. And I definitely know and understand the struggles that the young people are going through on the ground. And, part of the work that business does through transformation, diversity and inclusion, and I speak confidently about, business, not just ABSA, because I've worked in a couple of organizations where I know that the approach as well has been, what I'm going to say now, that there are quite a number of opportunities that business have in terms of contributing to youth employment. For me, what has always been key in terms of utilizing those opportunities is to always remember the fact that business cannot survive without the youth. I've already mentioned that majority of the people in Africa are actually youth, which means that if all youth cannot work, it means that we will not have customers. So it is important that as we engage, we actually understand that, there is a lot at stake for business to make sure that youth are involved in economic activities. So the approach that I think, for me, it should be followed by each and every business is to actually look at this holistically, in a sense of saying, youth are our potential customers. Youth are our, potential, as well as, potential and current customers, as well as, colleagues or employees that actually enable our businesses to thrive. And in terms of the challenges that we have been talking about, now, one of the big opportunities that businesses have is through their socio-economic development programs, as well as, the CSI programs. So for me, one of the things that I always got, a bit irritated about when I was still a social worker on the ground with the youth and some of the vulnerable communities, was businesses coming into the areas and decide what is needed without engaging with the communities. For me, it is important that through the CSI programs, through the socio-economic development programs, we use the opportunity to actually understand the needs of the youth on the ground, and we therefore tailor our programs around that, because we would know that we will be answering the question, or would be addressing the needs that the youth have through those programs, rather than going and deciding that today we're going to go and paint, the school, or paint an NGO or whatever, without really going deeper and understanding whether the painting is what that community needs. It is important that business also take cognizance of the other opportunities such as the enterprise development programs, where we are investing quite a lot of money, every year as businesses, into developing the small businesses. But what is key for me, specifically around the youth, is that we as businesses have to be intentional around measuring the impact that we are doing. And one of the things that we are doing in terms of APSA, where I am currently, is that we have been intentional around saying, in terms of our preferential procurement, how many of the businesses that we are supporting, that we are bringing to be part of our supply chain, are actually youth-owned. And also to say, how many of the people, of the youth that are employed through the small businesses that we are actually supporting through enterprise and supplier development, how many of the people that are benefiting from our skills development programs that are actually youth? And again, when you look at the banks collectively, in a year, we spend about 4 billion towards skills development program. APSA alone last year has spent 1.2 billion towards skills development program. So we need to actually be intentional around saying that from the money that we are investing, what are the results that we are actually getting? And I did a bit of an analysis to say, from that 1.2 billion, how much of that is actually going to the youth outside APSA, excluding the youth within APSA? About, over 100 million is actually going to the youth who are unemployed towards the, the learnership programs as well as the internship programs. But the question for me is, when we're doing those initiatives, how are they going to actually translate into actual jobs? So absorption for me is quite big, because we can continuously spend hundreds of millions, billions around, training and capacitating. But if we're not absorbing, that we are actually not realizing, the investment that we are return on investment. But at the same time, we are perpetuating a situation where you've got a lot of youth moving from one learnership to another, and not really getting, full-time jobs into the organizations. So we'll talk more about how do we actually do that, because for me it is important that yes, we are doing skills development, but are we investing in the skills that are required? Just a couple of days ago, there was one of the publications that was actually saying that the banks are losing quite a lot of institutional memory, because a lot of older guys who have got this memory about how the banks function are actually retiring. We need to actually say, how do we ensure that that skill is not going with the retirees, but we are actually investing into ensuring that we are capacitating the youth to take over those positions within the banks. So those are the kind of conversations that I think are important for businesses to think about, and we are thinking about it, but we need to actually action and say, how do we leverage on the programs that we already have, in the money that we are spending, how do we leverage on ensuring that it translates into more employment and more entrepreneurs? Because youth don't only want to be workers, they also want to be owners of businesses.
100% spot on. And I think absorption is so important and critical when looking at sort of skills development initiatives. And like you said, learnership hopping is a thing. Young people don't know what to do, so we hop from one learnership to the next just so that we get the stipend so we can survive. But that doesn't lead to employment. It just leads to a learner hopping from learnership to learnership. And like you said, there's billions being spent annually on skills development. Just this financial year, I know the Department of Higher Education and Training's budget was 130.1 billion, not only spent on skills development, but of course with a huge budget like that, where is it going? Where are we going wrong? What are we missing? What are we missing in this year? Khalil works with young people in TVET colleges. I know he's involved in some sort of learnership programs. Khalil, do you want to share a bit more in terms of maybe what you see could be a challenge in terms of absorption rates?
Sure, thanks, Sultan. Before I get there, just want to reflect on for just a tiny second on something you mentioned early on. And interestingly, Irfan and I were sitting outside before we started, and we were just reflecting on the same thing, that on this day, from all my years of corporate experience, Nelson Mandela Day is a day where people working in corporations go to old age homes and orphanages, etc., and paint. and that's sort of synonymous with Nelson Mandela Day, and that's generally not what is needed by those communities and institutions. Real support is needed for real change. And Altaf, going into the issue of employment, one of the key priorities of the programming that I lead with IWIFE is transitioning young people from education into employment or entrepreneurship. And it is extremely alarming to see this sort of trend of internship hopping or learnership hopping, where people go in. Many years ago, I remember I visited a group of persons on a learnership. It was a film and TV production learnership, and they had the entire group, which was selected by a municipality in the Free State, had just come off a water management learnership. Now, clearly, in that sort of paradigm or dynamic, going from a water learnership to a film and television production learnership, very clearly demonstrates to us that this is a case of people sort of finding an income through learnership. And I think we've created this problem in large part because of the fact that we don't absorb people into our programs. Organizations, by and large, tend to fund 1 to 3 year programs, and during that period of time, they expect to create miracles, and that just doesn't happen. Programming needs to run over a longer span of time, a minimum of 5 years, to really be able to see any kind of return. And even if you work on smaller numbers of individuals, it's important. And I think a lot of CETAs, for example, have started taking on this approach where they prefer to work on a 5-year program rather than a 1-year program, because we take people on a 1-year program and we place a large number, 1,000 people on an internship program. The employer, the host employer, just does not have the capacity in the organization at the end of that 12-month period to absorb 1,000 people. And I think the focus needs to change on quality rather than quantity purely, and I think over time that will enable us to build scale into our model. So, for me, I think it's important for an employer who is willing to host interns or learnership students, take on a small amount that is more manageable, and that they can realistically and practically absorb the majority of those young people into the organization, thereby creating meaningful employment, rather than kind of taking a whole lot, publicizing the fact that we've recruited 1,000 interns, yet 12 months later, 95% of them are looking for the next internship opportunity rather than having been employed. So for me, that's really the biggest component is focusing on long-term sustainability by creating actual employment, and that's impactful, rather than sort of working on this model that we currently use of bringing people in over a shorter period of time and then hoping that they find their wings and fly, because that's not going to happen. We need to empower and enable people. We can't just put them in a program and then release them and expect miracles to take place.
Yeah, no, definitely. We need to be more invested, and by more invested in the programs, across NGOs and business, is longevity and being results driven, and seeing that results come to life. And what that something popped to mind, and I'm just wondering if perhaps maybe young people are not ambitious enough, if I could put it that way. When we get a learnership, is that where it stops? Or do I want a job? Is that maybe lacking? Or the ambition is there? They do want to go further.
Can I jump in?
And I think Crystal as well.
Yeah, I've already unmuted. Sorry, Irfan.
Go for it.
My experience is that many young people, particularly those from the real, the marginalized communities, the idea of a career isn't even something that enters their mind. That's not for lack of ambition. It's for lack of what they see reflected back at them, for what they think is possible. And I think the role of these programs is to reflect what is possible to young people. Our school system, we have this subject life orientation, which is a complete wasted opportunity, right? We have young people from grade 8 to matric doing life orientation. It's a prime location to give young people career guidance. If you speak to young people, they're like, I wish somebody had told me this job existed. I wish I knew there was this career path. I would have chosen subjects better. I would have chosen a path of study that was better suited to my skills and interests. Instead, I did this thing because that's what everybody else did and I hate it and I'm actually not that good at it. And so I feel demotivated and I give up. And I think that, young people jump from learnership to learnership because they need to eat. And if we don't show them, well, actually, this learnership leads to that thing if you stick it out. And if you lead to that thing, it gives you the opportunity to build and earn more. And it might take you 5 years to get there. But if you keep jumping from one learnership to another and they don't link towards each other, you're always going to be capped at that learnership stipend. Nobody sits down and really explains this to young people. And so I think that's what we miss. We speak to some young people and they have this magical thinking about the world they see on TV and on Netflix and on YouTube and TikTok maybe, but they don't really know what's practically possible for them in their surroundings, and that's on us to show that to them. And I think that's the missing piece of the puzzle. I'll let Irfan add. I'm sure he's got more to say.
I'll expand on both points because yes, the context and environment really makes a big difference. In fact, just before I came here, my former primary school phoned to say, the reason we want you to come and speak on Thursday, and the reason we want you to do that is because the young people we have, they're not ambitious enough. They're not dreaming. And I'm like, I get that, but what are you doing to showcase the possibilities that are out there, that exist in the world today, that allows young people to access but also reach for that? So that they've done that, and it's part of the thing about context. Many don't have the mentors or the people who are able to showcase that, here's a program you can be part of, apply. Here's a growth path, that allows you to earn a great living, but also, travel the world, etc., etc. So I agree with that point that Crystal is making. Secondly, she touched on education and life orientation. Now, I became an educator. I didn't go formally into school. Life orientation was one of my majors. Fundamentally, that subject should be able to shift people's minds, to showcase the huge opportunities that the world has, to deal with the skills that we don't see rapidly available to young people. So CV writing, interview skills, all those things that I'm sure corporate would have experienced, there's a huge lack of, are not being taught, and that is in the curriculum. It's meant to be taught there. But just how do you find your place in the world as a person? And that's something that curriculum has not been effectively dealt with. I've just returned from a UNESCO summit in Paris that was focused on transforming education. Now, that's a very, very, very big priority for the youth globally. We mentioned Africa, but I think globally, I've met and experienced and have been doing some work around young people's responses to these issues that we have. And it's not just local, it's globally experienced, but the Global South, obviously, much more. The conference then put the pre-summit, a youth declaration in which many were saying, we need comprehensive sexuality education, for example. We need an education that gears young people to the jobs of the future and the present that currently our systems aren't geared up to. And we're seeing slow intervention from government, for example, to try to shift that. But equally so, we're seeing them regress by saying there's a current policy in place that the education department doesn't want or wants to remove the norms and standards for when they will deliver upon basics like a toilet. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because I think by and large our education system has to be transformed completely. We've done a lot of work in South Africa since the dawn of democracy, but I don't think we've really grappled with the question of what does this education system, what is it meant to produce? What is the kind of individual we want coming out of this, because currently what it's saying to young people is that this matric certificate means nothing. I'd rather throw it away or chuck it in the toilet. And that's the value that it's placing on young people. And principals and teachers alike are saying this to me because we work in these communities, and that's the reflection, is that there's no hope that comes with that. So I think it's about redesigning a system that encourages the agency of young people, but also the opportunities for them to grow, not just in this big country and ambitious. You mentioned ambition. Ambition is not just huge things that you want to achieve. It could be just in your community, wanting to start your own center and so on, which could lead to huge change and create the necessary income and whatever else.
I hear you, and I hear very loudly the need to change the system. And often that comes with many years of policies, of discussions, and by the time we change the system, it's already outdated. I think what maybe we can touch on a bit is how do we change these systems fast enough to adapt to the challenges faced within our country, within societies and communities. How do we change that fast enough to see a difference? We've for the last several years, in fact, since the dawn of democracy, we've known for a fact that we haven't had great economic growth, as a country, and we're faced with this high rate of youth unemployment, and there's this particular focus on youth unemployment because they are the future. They are the ones that are next in jobs, or supposed to be, at least. So I think how do we change those systems fast enough? And this is not only from government, but within business, within NGOs. How do we change those systems?
Can I come?
Sure, of course.
I wonder if we've got shortage of proper systems. For me, I think in terms of policy, there is enough policy that government has put in place. There is enough legislation. There is, enough strategies, transformation strategies that we actually have as an organization. I mean, as a country, which actually, position the business world as well as the communities to actually, do this thing, right? For me, where the problem is actually implementation. Because we can have more policies, more things that government does. When you look at skills development, there is a lot that the government is actually doing to reward organizations that are actually investing in skills development. For me, what is important is to say, when we actually implement these skills development programs, are we actually implementing them in such a way that is creating a sustainable economy for everyone? Because, going back to the example that I was giving, that, there is a study that showed that there is a lot of institutional memory that is being lost through people who are retiring. The question is, when you look at all these skills development programs that are happening, the development, or rather the focus, is it on critical and scarce skills? We every year we hear organizations say, we are battling to get, women who are skilled in terms of this specific, opportunity. We are struggling to get young people. But the question is that with all this money that we have on skills development, why are we not connecting that to that area where we are battling? Because yes, there is a space for us to provide generic skills development programs where, basic things around computer literacy for the young people, around how you create your own CV and go out there and look for the market, for the job in the market. But the question is, are we empowering them with the right skills that will help them to actually to add value in the organizations, but also to save us as an economy? Because if we're going to lose a whole lot of people who are skilled in a specific area of business, and we don't have young people who are coming in, we're not creating a talent pipeline where we can say, we know very well that when this X amount of people are retiring at the end of 2022, we actually do have young people who we are already starting to prepare to take over. So for me, it's more around implementation and really connecting this to the fact that it's important and it's key to our sustainability as businesses, as an economy, rather than we are creating the job. One of the things that I always say to young people is that young people need to realize that businesses need them. It's not the other way around. Businesses cannot survive without young people who are actually buying our products. It cannot survive without young people who will come and be on the decision-making table and actually say the product that you're having does not speak to young people. So it's about how we actually implement that and also really bring to life. That for me that is important, because if we've got older people who are sitting in the boardroom, the whole boardroom is full of older people who are making decisions, and then we finish, we take that product that we are so convinced that is a wonderful product and want to sell it, and then young people don't buy it, you are actually shooting yourself in the foot as a business. So we need young people, and therefore we need to be strategic and intentional around how we are actually bringing them into the economy.
Can you look at the 2 cents?
Yes,
because I do think the implementation problem is a systemic one. Too long, and specifically not just business, but government in itself, you'd have a policy that makes sense, that people agree with, but unable to implement. So I think coupled with that is just creating cultural shifts in what it means to actually be in a position of power and serve people and be there to implement something. If you're an implementer, you need to understand your role is to just ensure that this is done and not be taken away by whether it's a political party and that's how you see these huge shifts of corruption happening. Not shifts, there's huge corruption happening and taking over the entire landscape of that system. So I agree. I also just think that South Africa really has to grapple with tough questions, because there are those skilled labor, that skilled labor you're speaking of are leaving because of the huge systemic failures. Skilled labor are they're going because there are better opportunities abroad, and there's really, why should we deal with electricity going all the time? Why should we deal with corruption? Why should we deal with not having a proper transport system, et cetera, So I think that's why I think from our perspective is it's holistic, and it really requires actually huge shifts in our own collective mindset.
And interestingly, I think there's a question that came in earlier where a young person asked, when are we going to deal with skills development programs that are so outdated? Because we're spending money on programs that are outdated, and I think it's critical. But that's coming back to the point of system change. Because we haven't changed these systems, we haven't changed these programs, who's looking at it? It's pointless if we're having, like you said, a bunch of older people onto retirement making these decisions. Are we including young people in those decision-making processes? And how are we doing that? It's not a case of I open the door and expect young people are just going to join, because a young person's not going to join at a boardroom table with a whole troop of older sort of people onto a pension, if I can put it that way. So how do we open those spaces up? I think is critical. With that, I just want to, if you can touch on how NGOs can contribute towards that system change. IWF does work with the Department of Higher Education and Training quite closely. How is it that NGOs can bring about the system change within the skills development sphere?
Thanks, Altaf. I think NGOs occupy a rather unique space because we're not the private sector and we're not the public sector either. We sort of occupy this tiny little narrow passage in between these various larger powerhouses, if you will. And NGOs are able to successfully, because of that unique positioning that they enjoy, NGOs are in a position to help enable dialogue and conversation across those two and really serve as a bridge between business interests, both public and private sector, and then government from an educational perspective and a systems perspective. Interesting, and I'll sort of link my response into some of what was already discussed regarding life skills, etc. And IYF has successfully been able to cultivate a really, really successful working relationship with DHET over the years. And something that I found, remarkably interesting is we often complain about government bodies or institutions, etc. And what I found is that they are keen to work with us. There's a strong willingness to work with us. They fully enable and support our work. And the reason they do so is because we are willing to do the work. We get involved, we get our hands dirty, and we take care of what needs to be done. So, for example, Christelle brought up, and it was discussed, the issue around life skills. One of the key pieces of work that we've been able to implement in the TVET colleges is the enhancement of the NCV life skills curriculum to include specifically aspects around employability, around workplace readiness. So that's your CV writing skills, your presentation skills, and together with that, we've included aspects of LGBTQIA awareness, of gender dynamics, etc. And DHET as a whole has been incredibly receptive and supportive to our work. And I think, so for me, the key distinction is really just being able to get into a system, persist, and really get the work done, because we tend to talk, we have a lot of talk shops, and we discuss and we plan, and then we don't do anything. And it's in that lack of action that we find that we do not have or enjoy the results that we had put onto the chalkboard or on the blackboard when we were planning and developing things. So for me, that's really the biggest challenge. It's really just transforming this mindset that we have in South Africa, where we sit in forums, discuss and plan, and then that's as far as it goes. For example, there's 5 of us sitting in this panel today, and we each, as individuals and as representatives of various organizations, need to make a firm commitment that when we walk out the door, the conversation doesn't just stay here and recorded on Zoom and Facebook. It needs to be something that we bring life to every single day going forward. Make these changes happen. And like I said, from my perspective, we've been able to do the work simply because we're willing to get involved and do it. We don't provide funding or grants or anything of that sort. The value that IYF adds in terms of system change really and truly or completely is on just doing the work and making actual changes. And that's really what's enabled us to grow from strength to strength in that regard.
And how long have you been involved in this working relationship with DHET, which is a government body? How long has that been?
So IYF has been working in South Africa, long before my time, for about 15 years. And but back in 2019 is when we formally entered into a letter of cooperation or formal agreement with DHET. And through this time, we piloted our life skills work in initially 2 colleges and then 3, 4, 5, 7. And currently we're rolling out our curriculum updates throughout the TVET colleges across the country. So again, really strengthening the life skills component there. And Crystal, you're 100% right. The life skills curriculum at present, and in the way and form that it is, does not enable people to choose direction in terms of their careers, to find work, to grow in their careers, etc. And those are the huge challenges. And I look forward to the day when we can roll out this implementation of upgraded and relevant life skills training, not just in the TVET system, but in the traditional schooling system as well. And I think to some extent, even in your entry-level years of university as well.
I think that's education is key. and Nelson Mandela is a lot of emphasis so on education, and changing is so essential. I mean, we heard during the time of his master of decolonizing sort of education, simply because it's also outdated. You know, it's not relevant. It's not relative to young people, to the struggles they face. So I think changing those systems are so important, but it's also so motivating, I think, for us working in that space to hear that it is possible. It is possible, and one of the key, and I think for us, you know, as mindful skills, why we decided to go ahead with this event is to really start bringing that together and so synergizing organizations, because we're all trying to achieve the same thing. We're all trying to get to the same end goal. It's just bringing the collective together and saying how best, with the resources we have, can we make a change? Can we be effective? And really be that change, you know. That's what we want to see. I think right now, more than ever, we need to be that change, because things are bad, really bad in terms of youth unemployment and unemployment overall. So I think being that change is going to be so critical and key. Busi Siwe, just briefly, I know we've spoken about it, but briefly touch on the role of business in skills development and the importance. Just to sort of sum it up for some of our viewers who are in business, and why is it so important to be giving back in skills development.
I mean, I have already mentioned the fact that business cannot survive without youth, but at the same time as well, business cannot survive without the right skills. You know, the right skills speaks to the relevance of those skills. It also speaks to the environment and the times that we find ourselves in as businesses. At the beginning of the conversation, we spoke about, I mean, Crystal spoke about the fact that there are people who have actually leaving jobs because they cannot travel. They don't have, you know, money to travel from where they are to where the work is. The reality is that these days you don't have to be in a building for you to deliver on the work. So businesses need to be able to find creative ways to actually provide the skills that will enable people to work from wherever they are. You know, I was saying earlier on that, you know, I haven't been on the road, I don't know for how long, because I've been working from home since COVID started. And our company is not looking at everybody going back to work full time, because we are agile. We are looking at, you know, what are the better ways to do. Now that I'm working from home and I'm a mother, I'm actually more of a mother than I ever been in my career, because, you know, working from home allows me that opportunity to be able to be a present mom, but at the same time, I even produce even more than I was producing when I was driving from Pretoria East to Johannesburg every day, spending like 3 hours on the road. So that 3 hours, I'm, you know, directing it to more work and my children as well. So we need to find creative ways, and the role of business really on this one is to say, currently, what is the need? What is the circumstances that we find ourselves in as a country, as a continent, in fact, you know, globally? We find ourselves in a situation where, you know, we have woken up to the world that people deliver without necessarily be behind the desk in an office. You know, people can be delivering when they're sitting at home somewhere. So for me, I think what would be really important is if we can see that translating into you know, what we're doing within our organizations, where we say people are working, you know, in a hybrid fashion, where you come in the office when you need to, or once a week, or whatever. We need to actually translate that to the people who are unemployed as well, to say, how do we ensure that we are actually providing these programs, you know, in a fashion that will enable them to be able to get the skills, but at the same time to be able to participate in the economy. And also in terms of relevance, you know, there is definitely a big role that NGOs can play still, and you know, even in the future. And one of the things that I would like to leave with my panelists is that in terms of the kind of support that you provide in the youth employment or youth unemployment or skills development space, you also need to be very close to the organizations that you partner with. Businesses are in the business of business. We are not in the business of, what you guys do. You guys have got a big role. We partner with you because we focus on banking, you focus on what you do best. So we need to say through this partnership, as NGOs and businesses, the roles that you're playing, we also need to look at and say, how do we ensure that we are actually getting more value from NGOs? How do NGOs actually get more value from businesses? Because it's a partnership where there is value for everyone. There should be value for everyone. But at the same time, we also need to say, how do we actually, enable these young people to be able to know where these opportunities are? I mean, I myself come from rural areas. I grew up in the rural areas where the only career that was there that we knew about was teaching, social work, or police or nurse, and I became a social worker. But we as the professionals now need to go there and not allow our young people to be in a situation where they don't know about these careers. We need to provide mentoring. That's part of the role that we need to play as business people. We need to go there, provide mentoring, but also bring the young people closer to business and let them understand what the business of banking is all about and which value they can actually add, what the business of technology is all about, whatever businesses that we are doing in our respective organizations, we actually need to bring them closer. People mustn't know about, ABSA the minute they come and work for ABSA. They actually need to understand what ABSA is about outside, so that young people are very clever. Young people are very innovative, and they sit and they fold their arms and let's see if they can be able to do this, without us. And we can't. So we need them to actually help us in shaping the direction of where banking is going. These days, you don't have to go to the bank for you to, we need to hear from the young people how we can do it better. So the role is to really bring everybody to understand this business of ours better as the business community, so that everybody can have a meaningful role in terms of driving this and creating, bringing that change in terms of youth employment. And young people should not wait to be employed. They should actually, raise their hands and say, I can see a gap there, I can see a gap there. We're living in that world. Yeah.
Critical, and I think this panel discussion has clearly been fruitful in that sense that it's brought us together here. And I think something great can definitely come off this partnership, and definitely we can hear each other in the different spheres of work, of how we need to synergize our efforts. And I think that's what it's all about today, is just hearing that and seeing how best we can work with each other. With that, I want us to just give all closing remarks. I know this discussion can go on for quite long, but I think let's go on to Crystal, and you can just share with us some of your closing remarks, and also, what's your take home from today's discussion?
Thanks, and thanks everyone. It's been a great discussion, and I've loved the representation from the different sectors in the room today. I think that's important, and I think that's my takeaway. I love listening to Busi talk as somebody from the private sector, but unfortunately, her voice is the minority in my experience, because businesses are in the business of business, and she's absolutely right, and that's how it should be. And I think what many businesses fail to realize in the conversations I've had is exactly what Busi said. If we don't make this generation of young people employable, there's going to be no one to buy your product and to use your service 10, 20, 30 years from now. And so it's really important that we equip young people to have the buying power to support your business. And I think we really need to drive that home. And that goes to my final comment, which is we really need collaboration between the different sectors. Youth employment is complex. And exactly as Busi says, we all have a role to play. How do we play that role in a more coordinated way? I think that's really what you're youth capital is trying to do, to bring people around the table that wouldn't necessarily be around that table if we hadn't orchestrated that conversation. And I think conversations like this are so important, but they need to land in solutions, which I think has also already been said. What is the follow-up from this? We at Youth Capital, I'm really interested in having a conversation around TVETs. We want to talk about work experience and work-based place learning that needs to happen as part of the TVET curriculum. We need to bring businesses into that conversation. How can Youth Capital do that? We're going to be talking to SMEs in the next few months to try and understand their challenges with hiring young people. We need to identify challenges and then identify solutions that work, so that we can really go forward and give young people an opportunity to be all they want to be and create the life for themselves that they've imagined. And thanks for the opportunity today.
Well, thank you so much, Krista. Starting from the far right, could you?
Yeah, thanks, Altaf. I think from my perspective, I think something that I closed on in my last bit that I spoke about, and I think we need to move from trying our culture of trying to throw money at problems to fix them. The money is needed, obviously, but I think we need to work on concrete solutions in action. And I think that's where, culturally, to some extent, as a country, we fail, is that we have resources. We've got ample resources in this country alone without even relying on the global north, for example. Yet we spend, the bulk of our time trying to come up with solutions to problems that we currently creating at the same time, or simultaneously creating. And the biggest challenge there is the lack of action. There may be a will, there may be a desire, etc., but without action, even the best laid plans, South Africa has one of the best, most progressive pieces of legislation and policy in the world, yet despite that fact, the fact that we do not take action means that all of it lives on paper and is not realized to the benefit of the country as a whole, young people specifically and especially, but largely speaking, it does not benefit the people of this country because of the fact that we don't enact the policy that we have in place.
I think I've already said a lot, not long. I think there's a lot to celebrate. Most of the time when we speak about the challenges, we sometimes forget that we have come a long way as an organization. As a country. And there is a lot that we need to celebrate, but at the same time, there is still a long way to go in terms of really bringing everyone and including everyone in the economy. For me, what is important and what is critical is that we need to have an understanding of the young people's needs. We need to have an understanding of where the young people are, because at the end of the day, if we are creating for young people, if we're creating products for young people, if we are, we need to be relevant to them and to their needs. And it is also important that young people are aware of the resources that are in organizations and start to find ways of tapping into those organizations. There is socio-economic development. Each and every organization has got socio-economic development budget, which is outside CSI. CSI is the feel-good things, right? And people who are in the CSI space will probably kill me. But socio-economic development is specifically around transforming the economy, right? So young people need to find out what are the socio-economic development programs that organizations around them have, and how can they tap into that. There is enterprise and supplier development programs. When you are trying to run your own small businesses, find out the organization that is not far from you, what are they doing around enterprise development, and tap into those resources. If you are already finding your way into that specific organization and you are battling to grow as a small business, let's say they manage to give you a small piece of their, of the work, find out what are the opportunities that I have from the supplier development. Somebody who's already a supplier within the organization also there is a budget that is focusing on developing the suppliers within the organizations to make sure that they're employing more people and growing. So let's find out about that as young people. And lastly, in terms of skills development, find out what are the other things beyond the learnerships. Learnerships are very popular. Beyond the learnerships, what are the other programs that the organizations are doing to actually, ensure that they're creating that talent pipeline and tap into those programs. Like he says, there's no shortage of resources. There's no shortage of money. There's a lot of money that is spent every year. Young people need to go out there and say, I am here and I'm aware that you've got this and this and this and that program. Please, how can I tap into that program?
Thank you so much, Busisiwe. Irfan, closing remarks, message, and your takeaway.
I don't know what else to say after everyone. Let me start here. Busi said business is in the business of business. I think where I come from, our business is about serving and about activism and about creating change. And we do this because we fundamentally recognize that in a society that's fracturing all over, we have to find hope. We have to find the ways in which we can bring people together and start building and start developing and start changing the circumstances and not being paralyzed by it. So I agree with Khalil. Ours is about rolling our sleeves and doing the work on the ground. And that's what you'll see from our side. And I think in the sense of commitment, we're always open to partnerships. And it's so good because, we've worked with Youth Capital before, and we hope with everyone else to continue that in small or big ways, because I think there's no way possible each of us alone can solve these issues. And it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult, but we're going to have those difficult discussions and find common ground. In a globe that is polarizing, that's saying it's an us and them situation, we have to say no, it's a collective thing. And all of our roles then must be put together. We have to collectively put our minds together. And like they're saying, is the solutions are there, it's just a matter of implementing and getting that shift in place. So thank you for allowing us to be on the panel, and also invite everyone, if they are around, we have a Mandela Day food drive at 2 p.m. in Kathrada, if they'd like to join.
Perfect, you can share the details with
Sure.
us. I'd like to thank you all, and I think really the objective has been achieved for today's panel discussion, and bringing the various stakeholders in the space together, and hopefully from this discussion it's not going to be just a talk shop. From my panelists, I'm going to hold you all. I've been singing the song for the last few months of accountability. So I'm holding you accountable to your commitment to change, to opening the doors to each other, to young people, to synergizing efforts, to bringing on board other partners as well. We all know another person that's working in the same space, at least one other person or one other organization. Bring them on board. Let's synergize our efforts and make the difference that we need to see and that we want to see. With that, thank you everyone for joining us, and it was such a pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.